What happens when kings abandon their thrones, queens march at the head of armies, and priests ignite the fury of entire nations, only for it all to collapse into betrayal and defeat? The Second Crusade was born in fire, led by monarchs and fueled by faith, but instead of glory, it ended in humiliation, shaping the fate of the Middle Ages for generations. Part 1. The Fall of Edessa. The spark came in the winter of 1144 in a lonely outpost far from Europe's centers of power. Edessa, the first Crusader state, had been carved from Mesopotamian lands during the First Crusade. Baldwin of Boulogne had taken advantage of chaos to seize the city in 1098, and for nearly half a century the cross flew over its towers. Yet Edessa was never secure. Unlike Jerusalem with its holy prestige, Antioch with its wealth, or Tripoli with its Mediterranean coast, Edessa had little to offer except its position. It was landlocked, surrounded by hostile powers, and populated by a fragile mix of Armenians, Syriac Christians, Franks, and Muslims who tolerated its rulers only when it suited them. Count Jocelyn II inherited this kingdom of dust and tension. Chroniclers describe him as indulgent, quick-tempered, and careless in alliances. Instead of fortifying his walls and binding allies tightly, he squandered resources and nursed grudges. The county's position demanded constant vigilance. Jocelyn gave little. In late 1144, he made a fatal mistake. To aid his allies, the Artukids, against Zengi of Aleppo, Jocelyn marched nearly his entire force out of Edessa, leaving the city practically undefended. Zengi, a man of ambition and ruthless purpose, had long sought to unite Syria and push back the Crusaders. The chance was irresistible. He moved swiftly, surrounding Edessa in November with siege engines and ladders. Inside the walls, panic grew. The garrison was thin, the people terrified. Appeals for help went unanswered. For nearly a month, defenders hurled stones and arrows. Women carried water to the ramparts. Priests begged for deliverance. But the siege towers crept closer each day. On December 24th, the wall was breached. Zengi's men poured in. The massacre was merciless. Men cut down in the streets, women and children taken as slaves, churches looted and burned. Chroniclers tell of priests killed at the altar and congregations trapped inside blazing sanctuaries. The citadel held for a few more days, but surrendered under hopeless terms. The fall of Edessa was more than a military loss. It was a psychological earthquake. This was the first Crusader state to collapse. For Muslims, it was a triumph. Zengi was hailed as al-Malik al-Mansur, the victorious king. For Christians, it was a catastrophe, proof that the Crusader foothold in the East could crumble. Across Europe, the shock would stir kings, queens, and peasants alike into a new call to arms. Part 2. The Call to Arms. When word reached Europe, it spread like wildfire. Merchants, pilgrims, and clerics carried the terrible news. Edessa had fallen, its people slaughtered, its churches lost. Panic swept through Christendom. For many, it felt like the work of the devil himself. Pope Eugene III, newly elected and weak in authority, seized the moment. On December 1st, 1145, he issued the Bull Quantum Predecessoris. The document reminded Christians of the glory of the First Crusade and urged them to rise again, promising remission of sins for those who took the cross. But the initial response was lukewarm. Lords were weary, peasants fearful, and memories of the First Crusade's hardships still lingered. Momentum changed when King Louis VII of France took the cross. His decision was not only pious but also political, a chance to assert his kingship and atone for a disastrous war in Champagne. When Louis committed, crowds followed. His Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine also vowed to go, an extraordinary step for a woman, though her presence would later spark controversy. Soon after, Conrad III of Germany joined. For the first time, entire royal courts marched toward the Holy Land. To kindle greater fervor, the Pope turned to Bernard of Clairvaux. Bernard was no ordinary preacher. He was the most famous abbot in Europe, a man so revered that his words were said to work miracles. From the pulpits of Vézelay and Speyer, he thundered that God demanded action. Chroniclers say men wept as he spoke. Nobles tore off their cloaks to make crosses, and whole villages pledged themselves. Bernard even wrote to nobles across Europe, urging them to send men and resources. Yet zeal turned dangerous in the Rhineland. A rogue monk named Rudolf incited mobs against Jewish communities, claiming they were enemies of Christ just as dangerous as the Muslims. Synagogues were burned, families murdered. Bernard himself had to intervene, rebuking Rudolf and demanding he stop. His intervention saved many, but the wounds remained. By 1147, preparations stretched from the Rhine to the Loire. Shipyards worked to outfit fleets, nobles raised banners, and peasants sold what little they had for passage. The Second Crusade was no longer a dream. It was a massive Europe-wide movement. From Iberia to Germany, from Sicily to England, Christendom prepared to march. But already the seeds of division and disaster were sown. Part 3. A wider war. Unlike the First Crusade, the Second was never confined to the Holy Land. Pope Eugene expanded the campaign's scope, granting the same indulgences to those who fought Muslims in Iberia or pagans in the Baltic. This widened crusading fervor and created different theaters of war with different outcomes. In Portugal, King Afonso I sought to expand his new kingdom. In 1147, a fleet of Crusaders, mostly English, Flemish, and German, en route to the east stopped at Lisbon. Persuaded by Afonso, they joined his siege of the Muslim-held city. For 4 months, the Christians attacked, facing famine and fierce resistance. Finally, in October, Lisbon fell. It was a spectacular victory. Thousands of Muslims were expelled or enslaved, churches rededicated, and the city became Portugal's permanent capital. Further east, Ramon Berenguer, the Fourth of Barcelona, struck Tortosa in Catalonia with Genoese naval aid. Tortosa fell after a bitter siege in December 1148, followed by Lerida and other strongholds. In Castile, Leon, and Navarre, armies pressed deep into Muslim territory. Here, unlike in the East, the Second Crusade strengthened Christian kingdoms. Meanwhile, in the Baltic, German nobles launched the Wendish Crusade against Slavic pagans. Preachers declared it holy, but the campaigns often looked more like raids for land and plunder. Entire villages were burned, captives enslaved, but conversions were few. Still, the papacy celebrated it as another front in the war for Christendom. These victories in Iberia and the Baltic contrasted sharply with the Eastern Front. Where Lisbon became a Christian triumph, the Holy Land would see only failure. Chroniclers noted the irony. The same crusading movement that blessed Portugal with conquest would curse Jerusalem with humiliation. Part 4. The March to Disaster. The German army set out first. Around 20,000 strong, Conrad III's host crossed Hungary peacefully, but suspicion brewed as they entered Byzantine lands. Emperor Emmanuel I Komnenos, wary of these vast forces, rushed them across the Bosporus to Asia Minor. There, Conrad ignored advice to wait for the French and struck toward Iconium. It was a fatal choice. The Anatolian plateau was barren, and the Seljuk Turks knew every valley and hill. In October 1147, near Dorylaeum, the Germans were ambushed. Turkish horse archers circled them, arrows darkened the sky, and the German line broke. Thousands fell. Conrad himself was wounded. Survivors limped back to Nicaea. The French arrived later, led by Louis VII and Queen Eleanor. They too faced betrayal by terrain and ambush. At Mount Cadmus, the columns stretched thin along narrow passes. Turkish archers attacked from above. Knights charged uphill in desperation, while baggage wagons tumbled into ravines. The French king barely escaped. Hunger, disease, and constant attack bled the crusading hosts. By the time they reached Anatolia, most armies were destroyed. Ships carried fragments to Antioch, while many common pilgrims were abandoned and slaughtered along the roads. The proud March of Kings had turned into a trail of corpses. To Part 5, Politics in Antioch. When Louis and Eleanor reached Antioch in 1148, they were greeted by Prince Raymond of Poitiers. Charismatic and ambitious, Raymond urged them to strike Aleppo, the key to recovering Edessa. Eleanor supported him, seeing military sense in the plan, but Louis refused. His purpose, he insisted, was pilgrimage to Jerusalem, not risky campaigns. Rumors swirled. Chroniclers whispered of an affair between Eleanor and her uncle Raymond, fueled by their closeness and Louis's jealousy. Whether true or not, the gossip poisoned the marriage. Furious, Louis abruptly left Antioch, dragging Eleanor under guard. The rift between king and queen widened, and their fractured unity would shape the Crusades' fate. Part 6. The Council of Palmyra. In June 1148, leaders met near Acre. With Edessa beyond reach, they chose Damascus as their target. Damascus had once been a reluctant ally, but leaned toward Zengi's heirs. Holding it would strengthen Christian Syria. Some praised the choice, others called it madness. Nonetheless, the decision was made. Kings, princes, and barons swore to take Damascus, believing its fall would restore their honor. It was a gamble that would doom the crusade. For Part 7, the Siege of Damascus. On July 23rd, the combined host attacked from the west, pushing into lush orchards that gave food and cover. For a time, success seemed within reach, but disputes raged among leaders. Who would rule Damascus if it fell? On the fourth day, inexplicably, the Crusaders shifted to the eastern side. Here, the land was barren, water scarce, defenses stronger. Chroniclers accused leaders of bribery or treachery. Whatever the reason, the move was fatal. Nur ad-Din's army approached, morale collapsed, supplies vanished. On July 28th, the Crusaders fled in disgrace, harried back toward Jerusalem. Part 8, Aftermath. The Second Crusade ended in paradox. In Iberia, victories at Lisbon and Tortosa. In the East, utter humiliation. Trust between East and West fractured. Relations with Byzantium soured, poisoned by suspicion. Louis and Eleanor's marriage disintegrated. They divorced in 1152, reshaping Europe when Eleanor married Henry of Anjou, the future Henry II of England. Bernard of Clairvaux, once hailed as a prophet, was accused of leading Christendom into ruin. He insisted the failure was God's punishment for sin. Damascus, weakened by internal strife, fell to Nur ad-Din in 1154, uniting Syria. From that union rose Saladin, who would one day crush the Crusaders at Hattin in 1187. The Second Crusade began as a grand alliance of kings and peoples, stretching from the Atlantic to the Holy Land. It ended in ashes, betrayal, and mistrust. And from those ashes, the road to the Third Crusade had already begun.
Please subscribe and look for more documentaries at Swords and Shadows.